John Martin Bocas Wallace was born in the village of Walliford near Musselburgh on September the 6th, 1935. He was the son of a famous father. John Wallace Sr. was a well-known professional footballer who had played in goal for Raith Rovers and was now the goalkeeper for Blackpool. This picture shows Wallace Sr. before a match against Rangers for Raith Rovers in 1932. Young John, who would later in life be known as Jock, would grow up with football a huge part of his life, his father starring for Blackpool for well over a decade and appearing as a veteran in the 1953 FA Cup semi-final for Derby County. The trophy that year, ironically, was won by Blackpool. Jock would follow in his dad's footsteps, joining Blackpool as a goalkeeper when just 16 years of age. He was freed by the club in 1952, but finally made his first public appearance in goal for Workington Town in the bottom tier of English football. He was a part-time player, combining football with a job in a local coal pit. But his time down south was brief. He returned home and by 1955 he had signed for Berwick Rangers. But before he could play for the club came the day that changed his life forever. Jock was called up for national service and enlisted in the King's Own Scottish Borderers. The regiment was sent to far-off Millar, where there had been an uprising by a military group seeking independence. The Malayan uprising saw British soldiers take part in jungle warfare, with Wallace playing an active part. Wallace would later tell of how he would catch monkeys to eat, and how he would ensure he was near the radio tent whenever Rangers were playing, to find out the result from the BBC Home Service. He also spoke of how he learned the importance of teamwork and of fitness. Both could save lives, and both became central to his ideas on football management in later years. After his spell in the army ended, Jock's goalkeeping career finally started to take off. He left Berwick for Airdrie in 1957. He was now in the top flight, and his displays helped Airdrie into second place in the table by late 1958. Jock was selected in a trial match by the Scottish FA, and he was named reserve for a Scotland international match against Germany at Hampden the following year. It was the closest he ever came to an international cap. Later, in 1959, Jock was sold to English side West Brom. Perhaps the highlight of his time at the Hawthorns came in 1962, when he helped West Brom to a great FA Cup win over their local rivals Wolves. Wolves had a team who had just won the trophy 2 years earlier, and had famously played Rangers in the semi-final of the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1961. But Jock would then lose his place in the side shortly afterwards, with his goalkeeping career then ending in less glamorous surroundings. His next stop was at Little Bedford Town, a non-league club. In 1964, he was in goal when Little Bedford shocked English football, defeating Newcastle 2-1 at St James's Park in the third round of the FA Cup. He remained in non-league football for another 2 years, moving to Hereford, where he won his only league title as a player, the 1966 Southern League. He remained at Hereford until November 1966, when he moved north again to become player manager at Berwick Rangers of the Scottish Second Division. It was here that the name of Jock Wallace would become famous. In January 1967, Jock steered Little Berwick into the third round of the Scottish Cup, where they were drawn to play the holders Rangers. It was a dream draw for Wallace, a Rangers fan all his days, and who first went to Ibrox at the age of 9 when he walked 5 miles from Walliford to catch the Musselburgh supporters bus. He would then inflict the worst defeat on the club he loved in their long history. On January 28, 1967, Jock Wallace kept out everything the famous Rangers forwards could throw at him. Great goal scorers like Jim Forrest and George McLean were denied time and again. Then the unthinkable happened after 35 minutes. Berwick's Sammy Reid scored for the underdogs. There seemed plenty of time for Rangers to restore normality, but they struggled to break down Wallace's well-organised defensive wall. Winger Willie Johnston broke his ankle in an accidental collision with Wallace, a sign it was not to be Rangers' day. When the final whistle sounded, Berwick had won 1-0, and it was a result that made the front pages across the UK. This was a Rangers team after all that would reach a European final later that season.
Davie, my earliest memories was actually at Berwick Rangers, the other Rangers, when I was a wee boy, and running around the track with my dad, and the press were there taking some photographs. So that was my earliest memory of my dad as a football manager. I must have been only 4 or 5.
For one manager, the great Scott Simon, it was a humiliation, and a result that he never recovered from. He was dismissed in the November. But for Wallace, it meant instant fame. And his training methods were also in the news. His decision to improve the fitness of his team by taking them to the infamous sand dunes of Gullen saw several press reporters cover the story. The Berwick players looked surprisingly happy at the torture they had endured, maybe helped by the fact their player-manager would not ask them to do anything he would not do himself. Here is Wallace setting off to tackle another steep, sandy climb. By 1969, Jock was a man in demand, and he played his last match for Berwick in a Scottish Cup defeat to Aberdeen. After the match, he moved to Tynecastle, where he took up the position of the Hearts assistant manager and coach. At 33, he was no longer a player, and he immediately went about the task of improving the younger players at Tynecastle. He was a huge success. Within a year, Hearts having 2 players named in an England v Scotland under-23 match to be played at Sunderland in March 1970. Wallace made the trip to the game to watch his players in action. By then, Rangers were under new management. Davy White had been sacked in late 1969, and legendary former player Willie Waddle appointed boss. He formed a new management team with his old teammate Willie Thornton, 2 of the club's all-time great servants on the pitch, now entrusted to bring glory back to Ibrox. Thornton also travelled to Sunderland for the under-23 match, and the game was abandoned in the second half due to a sudden snowstorm. The early finish meant an early return to his hotel for Wallace, and he accompanied Thornton back there, as both were guests. During their conversation that night, Wallace spoke passionately about his training methods and football philosophy, and the Rangers number 2 was massively impressed. He was so impressed that he decided to recommend to Waddle that Rangers offer Wallace a coaching job at Ibrox. It was an offer Jock Wallace was never going to turn down. In April 1970, Jock Wallace of Hearts became Jock Wallace of Rangers. Season 1970-71 would start with a proud Wallace taking part in the traditional team photo call, standing behind the manager. He had fulfilled a dream to be at Rangers. He would then go on to make history at the club. Season 1970-71 was Jock's first at the club, and it started with the challenge for the League Cup. Rangers reached the final, where they would play Jock Stein's all-conquering Celtic side. They had won the last 5 league titles and the last 5 League Cups, and were overwhelming favourites to win. Even more so when it was announced that Rangers skipper John Greig would miss the match. But Jock and manager Willie Waddle had a plan. They decided to start 16-year-old Derek Johnston up front, Wallace persuading his boss that the youngster was the only forward they had who had the beating of Celtic captain Billy McNeill in the air. He was proved right when just before half-time, the teenager out-jumped the Celtic captain to head home the only goal of the game. It was the first and the only time a Waddle Rangers team would defeat Celtic, and the celebrations afterwards were long and memorable for both the fans and the staff. Wallace is shown here on the team bus on the way back from Hampden, to the left of captain for the day, Ronnie McKinnon. But celebration turned to sadness on January the 2nd, 1971, when a terrible disaster took place on Stairway 13 in Ibrox at the end of the Old Firm match. 66 Rangers fans were tragically killed when barriers collapsed, causing a horrific crush. The Ibrox pitch and dressing rooms were turned into temporary treatment areas, as the dead were laid on stretchers and the injured were cared for. Jock Wallace did what he could for his fellow Rangers fans that day, helping carry the injured to waiting ambulances, as players and staff from both clubs were left numbed with shock and grief. Rangers became a club in mourning, as Wallace joined everyone at Ibrox in both visiting the sick in hospital or attending the funerals of the fallen. It was the darkest time in Rangers history. Just over a year later, Wallace then played his part in the greatest of days. Season 1971-72 saw Rangers falter badly domestically, but they put together a magnificent run in the European Cup Winners' Cup. A memorable semi-final win over the mighty Bayern Munich meant a final date with old foes Moscow Dynamo, the venue, the new camp in Barcelona. It was Wallace who put the squad through their paces in the Spanish heat as the day of the big match approached. Manager Waddle and coach Stan Anderson took the advice of Wallace in deciding how to fill the gap left by a late injury to centre-half Colin Jackson, with the management team deciding that teenager Derek Johnstone would step back into defence and Alfie Conn would replace Johnson in midfield from the side who had defeated the Germans. On the eve of the game, the squad posed for a press photograph, Wallace convinced his boys were ready to make history. Skipper John Greig had been another injured out, but there was no chance that the team's inspiration and driving force would sit it out. His ankle heavily strapped, Greig led his team into battle, and it would be a battle that Rangers won. Centre forward Colin Steen scored a brilliant opener midway through the first half to send the 25,000 Rangers travelling fans wild, and by the 50th minute they were in dreamland as winger Willie Johnson scored two more. A long season and a spirited Moscow fight back meant a nervous last few minutes as the Russians pulled 2 goals back, but at the final whistle Waddle and Wallace embraced. Rangers had won their first and still only European trophy. The players and the management were now immortal. Despite not being able to enjoy a trophy presentation on the pitch, there were many memorable photographs taken with the famous trophy. Jock appeared in several, but this one of him enjoying a celebratory cigar is perhaps the most well known. Once the hangovers cleared, the team then posed together with the cup before heading home, Wallace standing between manager Waddle and goal scorer Steen. The team enjoyed a triumphant return to Scotland, and Wallace received news that his coaching skills had been recognised at elite European level. He was invited to give a lecture to the top West German coaches, but the following week a lecture was furthest from his mind, as just a couple of weeks after the Barcelona triumph, Willie Waddle decided to step aside as manager and move upstairs to the new position of club general manager. His successor as team manager, and just the 6th ever manager of Rangers Football Club in its long history, would be Jock Wallace. Season 1972-73 started with Jock Wallace now the man in charge of the Rangers team, and the tracksuit had become a suit and tie on match day. He was often accompanied in the dugout by Willie Thornton, who was again the club's assistant manager. But the suit was put away during the week, with Wallace still the man taking training, a much more hands-on management style than his predecessor. His first season in charge involved some significant early changes. Motherwell defensive midfielder Tom Forsyth was signed in early October, a player who would go on to enjoy a memorable career with the club and who would also make a memorable contribution later in the season. But there were other changes that stunned the Rangers support. Fans' favourite and goal-scoring hero of Barcelona, Colin Steen, was sold to Coventry City for well over the £100,000 he had cost from Hibs 4 years earlier. To the surprise of many, his place at centre forward did not go to Derek Johnstone, but to 19-year-old Derek Parlane, a player who had featured as a midfielder in his rare first-team outings under Waddle. Steen's transfer to Coventry saw former Ayr United winger Quinton Young move in the opposite direction, the lifelong Rangers fan delighted to return to Scottish football. His arrival cast doubt on the future of the other club goal-scoring hero from the Cup Winners' Cup final. And in early December, it was confirmed that Willie Johnson had ended his near decade-long Rangers career by signing for West Brom. Few would have believed in May that both the heroes of the European final would be gone before the year was out. Rangers had suffered badly with inconsistency in the first few months under Wallace, going out of the League Cup to Hibs and falling well behind Celtic in the league. By the start of 1973, some were even doubting the wisdom of appointing Wallace, but he started the new year with a statement victory in the Old Firm game. Goals by the new centre-forward Parlane and a last-minute winner from Alfie Conn gave Rangers their first league win over Celtic in 4 long years. 1973 marked the centenary year for Rangers, as at the time the official founding year of the club was recognised as 1873. Glamour matches were arranged to celebrate this momentous occasion, with Wallace's men pitting their wits against European champions Ajax in the first ever European Super Cup. And there was also a match against long-time friends Arsenal at Ibrox. The stadium was sold out for the Arsenal match, with admission prices reduced to just a few pennies. Rangers lost both of these centenary friendlies, but in domestic football they went on a magnificent unbeaten run. They almost caught Celtic in the title race, falling just 1 point short, before the teams went head to head in the Scottish Cup final at Hampden. In a classic final, Parlane and Conn both scored again, as the match swung one way then the other, before Tom Forsyth's glorious winner from all of 6 inches won the cup for Rangers.
And it's still there, it's there. Forsyth getting the final touch. It looked as if the ball was going in any case. And that's 3-2 for Rangers. With 15 minutes of the second half gone, that ball came across. It looked as if it was trundling. First of all, past the post, onto the post, static on the line, and Forsyth, lying handy, pushed it across.
Wallace had led his team to cup glory in his first season in charge, ending a 7-year wait for the Scottish Cup to return to Ibrox. He celebrated with his players on the pitch, before skipper Greg lifted the trophy to the delight of the Rangers fans in the 126,000 crowd. The last time there was ever an attendance of more than 100,000 for a club game in Scotland. And it was a royal occasion too, Princess Alexandria presenting the trophy as part of the SFA's own centenary celebrations. Hopes were high for season 1973-74, but it ended trophyless, and Wallace was faced with the terrible prospect of Celtic winning 10 successive titles the following season. He pushed his team harder than ever at Gillane pre-season, but season 1974-75 again started with too many drop points. A squad full of excellent players saw a 1975 start with the Old Firm neck and neck going into the New Year game at Ibrox. It was the day 10 in a row died. Wallace's men were inspired, none more than winger Tommy McLean, who set up the first goal for Derek Johnson, scored the second goal himself, then provided the cross for Derek Parlane to clinch a thumping 3-0 win. The players celebrated the most convincing win over Jock Stein's men for many years, and as McLean's man of the match display was given high praise in the newspapers, Wallace demanded similar performances for the rest of the season. By the last weekend in March, the championship was in sight. Rangers travelled to Easter Road to face second placed Hibs, with a 9-point lead over them, Celtic a point further back. A draw in Edinburgh would mean Wallace had done what no Rangers manager had achieved in 11 long years. And in the team again was Colin Stein, who had returned from his exile in Coventry just weeks earlier. Hibs were a goal up at the interval, and when Sandy Jardine missed a penalty early in the second half, the enormous travelling support maybe felt it was not their day. Then, a Bobby McKean cross was met by the head of Steen. The ball was in the net. 30,000 Rangers fans inside Easter Road erupted. Steen had scored another iconic goal.
Oh, it has to be Colin Steen's goal at Easter Road. I was right in line when Steenie was heading it, and it went in. The camera actually doesn't, the TV doesn't do it justice, Davie. The ball went in so hard. So that is a personal favourite of mine. You know, there was many, obviously.
Captain John Greig was injured, but named on the bench and was brought on with seconds left, so that he would be on the pitch when the title was won. In amazing and emotional scenes, the captain was lifted shoulder high by his teammates after the final whistle, while the man who had led his team to glory showed what this triumph had meant to him and to his club. Wallace was a champion.
And it's all over, and Rangers have done it. There's Jock Wallace, and there's Sandy Jardine, and that's the picture that says it all.
The Rangers fans savoured the Sunday newspapers, with the front pages and the back pages all featuring the story of a title won after a decade of hurt on the pitch and terrible tragedy off of it. The final league match of the season against Airdrie became a massive party, the match ending in a 1-0 defeat that few cared about. Wallace and his players showed off the trophy to a packed stadium and listened to the songs of celebration from the terraces. Rangers were the champions of Scotland again, and Jock Wallace was determined this was just the beginning. Season 1975-76 saw the start of the new Scottish Premier League, and title holders Rangers entertained Celtic on the opening day of the season. Over 69,000 saw Wallace's team lay down a marker for the new campaign, winning 2-1 despite trailing at half-time and losing Alan McDonald to a red card near the end. Winger Quinton Young scored a brilliant winner after Derek Johnson's stunning volley equaliser. And despite a few poor performances in the following weeks, Rangers reached the first cup final of the season and faced their old foes again at Hampden to decide the destination of the League Cup. Celtic had a new captain for the first time in well over a decade, Kenny Dalglish, now their skipper after Billy McNeil's retirement. Over 50,000 were inside the National Stadium, and they saw a tight contest that was decided by one flash of brilliance. That wonderful big game goal scorer Alec MacDonald scored the only goal with a trademark diving header, and the first silverware of the season belonged to Jock Wallace's Rangers. As the players posed with the trophy afterwards, the manager insisted he was aiming to land all 3 domestic prizes, a feat last achieved by the club under Scott Simon in 1964. And the league title came closer thanks to another Old Firm victory at New Year, a Johnston header in the first half being the only goal. After an inconsistent first few months, Rangers were now in their stride, and they put together a long unbeaten run that lasted right to the end of the season. And they did it with 2 surprise regulars on the side. International stars Derek Parlane and Sandy Jardine had missed a spell through injury, with backups Martin Henderson and Alec Millar stepping into the team. They both remained in the starting lineup, leaving 2 huge fan favourites on the bench. Wallace showed he had found a winning formula and he would stick with it. In late April, Rangers went to Tannadice, knowing a win would clinch the title and the second leg of a possible treble. Derek Johnston started the party on the terraces after just 22 seconds, and his goal turned out to be the only one of the afternoon. Wallace enjoyed the celebrations after the final whistle as much as any player, taking the acclaim of the thousands packing the stadium. Captain John Greig, the only player in the team who had played in the last treble-winning team, would now lead his Rangers team out in the cup final at Hampden against Hearts in the pursuit of history. The official attendance for the final was 85,000, but many inside the ground would say that this was very much underestimated. And they saw an even more incredible start to the match than the previous week at Tannadice. The referee started the match a minute early, and Derek Johnston headed the ball home after just 41 seconds, meaning the opening goal was scored before the 3 o'clock kick-off time.
Johnston with his shadow, John Gallagher. McLean and Gregg trying to plot something. McLean a floater, Johnston moving in, and it's a goal! A sensational start for Rangers. Derek Johnston's 28th goal of the season, and it came in the first minute of the match.
A goal from Alan McDonald just before half-time and another Johnston counter saw Rangers ease to a comfortable 3-1 win. Wallace heading straight for his captain as soon as the final whistle sounded.
And it's all over. It's all over. Jock Wallace is out of the tunnel. There he is with his Johnny Hamilton. Derek Parlane is there. A very, very good cup final indeed. A superb performance by Rangers and a brave, brave effort by Hearts. But the cup final, alas, is all about winners too. And in a minute you'll hear the roar. There it is. As Mrs. Allen, the wife of the SFA Secretary, Mr. Willie Allen, hands over the cup to John Gregg, and that's what the fans think about it.
Jock Wallace was a treble winner, just the 4th manager in Scottish football history to achieve the feat, following on from Bill Struth, Scott Simon and Jock Stein. The Scottish Cup was back at Ibrox after a gap of 3 years, and the victorious Rangers team were able to enjoy one more party. A final home league game against Dundee United, where all 3 trophies were paraded. Wallace was the proudest man in the country, as he posed inside the stadium with not just the 3 main trophies in the Scottish game, but also the Glasgow Cup and the Reserve League trophy. His beloved Rangers enjoying a season of complete dominance. But the following season would be a huge disappointment. After the squad were pictured in August with those 5 trophies in front of them, they would end 1976-77 with nothing. A combination of injuries to key players and inconsistent form saw Celtic win the league and the Scottish Cup. The cup final was especially painful, as Wallace's team lost 1-0 to a disputed penalty against a Celtic team now containing old Ibrox hero Alfie Conn. Wallace was determined season 1977-78 would see his team mount a much better challenge. The usual pre-season torture at Gillane, seeing some new faces in Jewett. The manager brought in 3 young and exciting players to freshen the team. Playmaker Bobby Russell arrived from junior football, with Wallace paying £100,000 to Clydebank for winger Davie Cooper and £65,000 to Kilmarnock for their forward Gordon Smith. But the season started badly. Defeats in the first 2 league games resulted in no points on the board and fans chanting for the removal of the manager during a dismal defeat to Hibs at Ibrox. Wallace understood their anger but maintained the team would come good. He was proved to be absolutely correct. After that rocky beginning, the team clicked into gear and strung together a great winning run, playing excellent attacking football. A highlight was the first Old Firm match of the season, Rangers roaring back from being 2 behind at half-time to win 3-2. Recent arrival Gordon Smith scoring twice, including the winner.
And this was an interesting one. At half-time, it was 2-0 into Celtic, and I thought any time my experience up to then had always been, if you're losing at half-time, basically you're getting slaughtered, you're getting a real row for the manager. And Big Jock went like, sit down, and I thought, here we go. It was the most positive team talk ever. He said, you're a better team than them, you're better players, they've scored 2 lucky goals, they can't handle you, you're fitter than them. If you play like that in the second half, we'll win this game. That's what he actually said. I was shocked by that. We went out in the second half, and I mean, it was a great memory for me. I scored the first goal, get us back in the game. Derek Johnson laid a nice ball into my path and I struck it in. Then Derek scored the equaliser, and then I got the winner that day as well. I think somebody shot and the goalkeeper sort of spilled it, and I just followed in and put it in the net. But to get 2 goals, including a winner, first Old Firm game, is a bit of a special memory.
Celtic would fall well behind, with Aberdeen emerging as the only real challenger to Rangers for the Championship. Smith scored again in a 3-1 New Year Old Firm win, as Jock Stein's team sat nearer the bottom of the table than the top. As well as being favourites for the title, Rangers also progressed through both cup competitions. In the Scottish Cup, the route to the final started with a nostalgic visit to Berwick for the manager, who 10 years earlier had made his name in the biggest shock defeat in Rangers history. Jock won again, Rangers getting belated revenge by winning 4-2. And in the League Cup, Little Forfar, managed by Archie Knox, were within 7 minutes of causing another enormous upset. Substitute Derek Parlane scoring the equaliser that took the game to extra time, before Rangers ran out 5-2 winners. Defeating Forfar meant another Old Firm Cup final in mid-March in the League Cup. At the end of an emotional week for the club, when first team player Bobby McKean tragically passed away, it was 2 of the new boys who made the difference and won the cup for Rangers. Davie Cooper would go on to score many great Hampden goals. His fiercely struck opener in the first half was his first ever Rangers goal at the National Stadium. But Celtic equalised, and the match went to extra time. There was just 2 minutes left when Gordon Smith found the Celtic net with a header to grab a dramatic late winner. Wallace and Gregg had their hands on silverware again, although what they thought of interviewer Archie Macpherson's choice of headgear is not known.
I'll never forget this. I got injured after the game with the hug that Jock Wallace gave me. He had me around the neck, cuddling me. I could hardly breathe, and I was like injured. And I thought, boss, you know you're hurting me there. But he loved it. He just loved the fact that was first cup final that season. Because the season before I joined Rangers, they'd also won nothing. It was quite funny because they were a treble winning season. Then the season before I joined, no trophies at all. Then this was us. That was the first one of that 77-78 season. And that was us on our way towards the treble.
At the end of the following month, Wallace and Gregg were celebrating again. The title race with Aberdeen had gone to the last day, with Rangers finishing the campaign just 2 points clear after defeating Motherwell 2-0 at Ibrox.
And they're becoming much more fluid again. And there it goes. John Gregg with the ball at the final. Rangers have won the championship. And I think Jock Wallace and Gregg overjoyed. And John Gregg wants a lap of honour. And he goes down to that huge support. Have a look at that support that the Rangers have. There they are, really laughing it up. The championship is theirs, something more to boast about, the 37th time that Rangers have won the title. Up goes John Gregg, acknowledged by his team as one of the great captains of Ibrox.
The club newspaper borrowed its headline from the song Queen had in the charts earlier in the season. Veteran skipper Gregg now 1 match away from becoming the only player to star in 3 treble-winning teams. The cup final the following Saturday saw Wallace proudly lead out his team for the pre-match formalities, with skipper Gregg and young Aberdeen captain Willie Millar both confident that they would later be holding the trophy aloft. Many had Aberdeen as favourites. They were undefeated since before Christmas and had won their last 2 meetings with Rangers 4-0 and 3-0. But Wallace's team was full of proven winners, and it was Rangers who dominated on the day and fully deserved their victory. Another Alec MacDonald Hampden diving header saw Rangers in front at half-time, before Scotland's top goal scorer Derek Johnston scored the second with a towering header into the top corner. The majority of the 61,000 crowd were now in party mood, but they had to endure a nervous last few minutes after Aberdeen grabbed an undeserved goal near the finish. The final whistle went, Wallace embracing his players and full of smiles as he took part in the lap of honour with his players. The names of Gregg and Wallace were ringing around Hampden, little did the fans know the sensational news that would involve them both less than 2 weeks later. After winning his second treble in 3 seasons, Jock Wallace resigned from his job as Rangers manager. The news was greeted with disbelief by the fans, who worshipped the man who had taken their club back to the top. It was confirmed he would head south to take over as manager of Leicester City, who had recently been relegated. His successor in the manager's office at Ibrox would be John Greig, who retired immediately as a player. It was a historic summer not just at Ibrox, as Celtic confirmed Billy McNeill would replace the legendary Jock Stein in the Celtic dugout. In the 6 seasons that Wallace and Stein had faced each other as Old Firm managers, they both won 3 titles and 3 Scottish Cups, with Wallace beating Stein 2-1 in League Cups. Jock Wallace was the 4th Rangers manager to cross swords with Stein, and the only one to beat him in number of trophies won. Rangers fans wondered what life would be like without the man who had given them so much to smile about.
The season was finished, and my mum came upstairs and she said, that's just on the radio there, Jock Wallace has resigned, left as Rangers manager. And I'm not joking when I tell you this, it was like a death in the family to me. It was like news that I couldn't believe, and I was so gutted about it that I just think, oh my God, I love playing for him, best manager I played for.
The sudden departure of Jock Wallace meant John Greig had the toughest of possible first jobs in management. And over the next 5 years, Rangers would win cup competitions and enjoy some famous European nights, but the team struggled in the league. Jock Wallace, meanwhile, quickly established his training regime at Leicester. He had a sand mountain built specially for pre-season training, as Leicester was too far from the coast for the real thing. Amongst the famous names who both suffered and learned under him was a young striker called Gary Lineker, seen here reaching the summit. Lineker still speaks fondly of the influence Wallace had on his career. Wallace moulded a Leicester team combining youth and experience to try to get them back into the top flight. His second season in charge saw Leicester win the second division title, and Wallace also guided the side to the FA Cup semi-final in 1982. But by then they had been relegated back to the second tier, and in the summer of 1982, Wallace returned north to take over as manager of newly promoted Motherwell. The fixtures for his first season in charge could not have started with a more fitting match. Motherwell will play Rangers at Fir Park. In emotional and memorable scenes, a packed away end chanted Wallace's name, giving him a reception never heard before for an opposing manager.
He says, "You must come down, John, you must come down to the tunnel." I'm thinking, what's he talking about? So I went down to the tunnel and I was right next to the players, you know, the both teams obviously, and he went out and the roar, I can still hear it to this day, Davie, it was unbelievable. And my dad, he wasn't expecting that, you know, he genuinely wasn't expecting that, you know, maybe a applause and a bit of applause and stuff like that, but it was unbelievable. It was tremendous, you know, it was just unbelievable to hear them, and they chanted for about 10 minutes. It wasn't just a couple of minutes, it was the whole, and if my memory serves me correctly, it was 2-2 that game, and you know, there you go, that was brilliant.
Who knows what the Rangers under pressure boss John Greig thought of it all when he shook hands with his former manager before the game. It ended 2-2, Wallace's Motherwell coming back from 2 goals down. In October 1983, Wallace's team defeated Rangers 2-1 at Ibrox, in what would be John Greig's last league game in charge. He resigned at the end of the following week, and after Aberdeen's Alec Ferguson and Dundee United's Jim McLean famously turned down Rangers, the club turned to their former manager. There was no chance Jock Wallace would refuse the club he adored. Jock Wallace was coming home. His first match back in November 1983 was a defeat at Pittodrie. Then almost 30,000 welcomed him back to Ibrox the following week against Dundee United. The Wallace effect was then immediate, Rangers going on an impressive unbeaten run that both shot them up the league table and also reached the League Cup final. The opposition on March the 25th, 1984, inevitably, was Celtic. The final would be the first Old Firm game of Jock Wallace's second spell in charge.
We have worked hard and worked well to establish the self-respect and confidence of the players. We've worked hard to get the respect of the players. Equally, they have worked hard to get our respect. So it's not just I want to put your finger on one thing.
Everybody says Rangers Celtic, greatest club game in the world, which it is. I mean, but what does it mean to people playing in it on Sunday?
I've never played in one, but I've managed the team in a few. And if I explain it in the sense that you've never lived and you've never died, you've been beaten by Celtic in a cup final, or beat them in a cup final. It's as simple as that. You know, it's a big occasion. You don't need to motivate yourself for this. My adrenaline's flowing right now, and there's still a couple of days to go. You know.
In probably his most famous ever interview prior to the game, a confident Wallace told of having the battle fever. And it wasn't just the manager who was looking forward to the battle. The first ever League Cup final televised live would show a sold out Rangers end, whereas there were many big gaps on the Celtic terraces. Wallace was forced to field a weakened team due to an injury and suspension crisis, but it didn't prevent Rangers from racing into a 2-goal lead, with Ali McCoist in his first major cup final scoring both goals, the first from the penalty spot. But Davie Hayes' Celtic roared back in the closing stages, McCoist conceding a 90th minute penalty that Celtic scored to level the game at 2 apiece. Wallace then had to pick up his deflated players for half an hour of extra time. His inspirational words had the desired effect. McCoist completed a fairy tale hat-trick to win the match 3-2 and give Wallace the first silverware of his return to the club. The boss had a smile as wide as the Clyde as he congratulated his players and gave post-match interviews, while McCoist was the centre of the celebrations after becoming the first Rangers player to ever score a hat-trick in a national Old Firm Cup final.
Unbelievable. There were big gaps to Celtic end. There were not one gap in our end. So, you don't know your celebrations, what it means to us to win.
And who was he most pleased for now that the cup was won?
For the troops, for the directors club, for everyone who works for it, and the fans, especially the fans, absolutely.
Thanks to their poor start, Rangers ended up third in the table, and season 1984-85 saw some new faces arrive, as Wallace looked to build on his early success and challenge for a first title since he had left in 1978. He brought in 2 players from Dundee who had performed well in matches against Rangers, striker Ian Ferguson and midfielder Cammy Fraser. He had also brought back Derek Johnson to the club after he had left for Chelsea towards the end of John Gregg's time in charge. Derek got to enjoy Gillane Sands all over again. And the season started well. A solid start was made in the league, although there were too many draws to see the team go top. And Rangers again reached the League Cup final, which this time was played in October, meaning Wallace had the chance to lift the trophy twice in the same year. Dundee United were the opposition in a final that the fans would later describe as not a classic. But it was decided by a superb goal just before half-time, scored by summer arrival Ferguson.
Russell to Fraser. Dawson to Cooper, controlled it very well against Redford. Ferguson scores! 1-0 for Rangers. Right on half-time, and to the delight of that huge throng of Rangers supporters, the Glasgow team goes into the lead with Ferguson scoring the kind of goal for which Rangers bought him from Dundee. Not an easy one to take, controlled it and then swept it away.
Wallace's team had lifted the first trophy of the new campaign and things were going well. But after the highs of Hampden, the remainder of Wallace's time in charge would see disappointment. Little did anyone suspect it at the time, but when Wallace held aloft the trophy in front of his adoring fans, this would be the last silverware of his Rangers career.
The scenes of joy unrestrained on the terraces. And Jock Wallace is not the kind of man You want to hug because he has a habit of breaking ribs.
The team went on a dismal run, crashing out of the Scottish Cup and falling well behind in the league. Signings were made to try and reverse the decline, such as midfielder Dougie Bell from Aberdeen. But despite the best efforts of Wallace and his assistant Alec Totten, results remained unimpressive, and the team began toiling badly despite the occasional impressive result. Season 1985-86 saw Rangers lose more league games than they won for the only time in club history. The last Old Firm League game of the season, and the last of Jock's time as manager, saw a memorable 4-4 draw, typifying the rollercoaster nature of watching the team at that time. On Sunday 6th of April 1986, Jock Wallace took charge of his last Rangers match, a 2-0 defeat at Ibrox in a friendly against Spurs. 2 days later, the club confirmed that he was no longer the manager. His replacement would be Scotland captain Graham Souness, club chairman David Holmes appointing the club's first ever player manager. Souness would be given funds to rebuild the team that Wallace could only have dreamed of. But Wallace had left his successor a very impressive foundation on which to build. In his final year in charge, Wallace had given extensive first-team experience to 3 young homegrown players, who would all then play a massive part in the early trophy successes of Graham Souness. Ian Durrant, Derek Ferguson and Robert Fleck all had Wallace to thank for his initial faith in them. And Souness also had Wallace to thank for the man who was his regular left-back for several seasons. Stuart Monroe had been spotted and signed by Wallace for a bargain fee from Little Alloa Athletic. And although only a player under Souness for a few months, Wallace had signed winger Ted McMinn from Queen of the South. McMinn was a major part in Souness's early success in Old Firm games and winning the League Cup. And of course, Wallace's team also featured 2 players who remain all-time club legends. Ali McCoist had been the Premier Division's top goal scorer under Wallace in that dreadful 1985-86 season, and had also won his first Scotland cap while Wallace was in charge. And the great Davie Cooper was again terrorising defences under Wallace, after the winger had been regularly left out under John Gregg. Cooper always had the trust of the man who had signed him for Rangers back in 1977. Jock Wallace left the club for a second time, and for a second time he refused to talk to the media or to criticise Rangers in any way. Any thoughts he had on his sacking were kept to himself. His way would never involve any public negativity towards the club he loved. The mark of a true Ranger. When Jock returned to football after leaving Ibrox again, it was a move that surprised many. Later in 1986, he accepted the job of manager at Sevilla in Spain's La Liga. The news was greeted by many jokes about it being a place well known for oranges. Wallace was popular with the support there, but despite reuniting himself with Ted McMinn, who he signed from Rangers in early 1987, his time in Spain was relatively unsuccessful. A 12th place finish saw Wallace leave after a year in charge. In April 1988, Wallace was in the news, and it was a story that angered every Rangers fan. Jock and his wife Daphne were enjoying hospitality in the stadium at a match against Aberdeen, when the former manager was asked to leave by security. Wallace immediately did leave along with his wife, stating that in future he would never ask the club for tickets again and would pay his own way. The very next weekend, he was pictured on the terraces at Falkirk, in amongst the people he loved most of all, the Rangers supporters. Soon after this, Wallace made one last return to club management, at lowly Colchester United. It was a spell he enjoyed, but the old fire did not burn as brightly as it had previously, and it wasn't too long before he decided to end his management career. Despite his health now becoming a concern, Jock Wallace was seen regularly at charity events, such as this golf day, where he was pictured with another Rangers great, Willie Henderson. Jock was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, But in 1994, that didn't stop him from striding onto the Ibrox pitch at half-time in a match which was ironically against Aberdeen. The club were determined to right the wrongs of a few years earlier and invited Jock as a guest of honour for the night, apologising for that terrible incident under a previous security regime. Manager Walter Smith, who had been as angry as anyone when he discovered what had happened back in 1988, was delighted when Jock accepted the invite, and the huge roar from the stands demonstrated the love all at Ibrox still had for their former boss. It was the last time the Rangers fans got to see Jock Wallace. 2 years later, on July the 24th, 1996, Jock passed away from Parkinson's disease at the age of just 60. The newspapers printed obituaries, and many of Scottish football's most famous figures paid tribute. Perhaps the man who summed up the life of Jock Wallace best was Walter Smith. He gave an emotional and heartfelt interview mentioning all the great achievements of Jock Wallace, the Rangers manager. And he ended it by simply saying, "Jock will be remembered as a great Rangers man, and that may be all he ever wanted." There is no doubt that the Rangers support to this day regard Jock Wallace as one of the club's greatest. When the fan group started displaying banners at matches in the early years of this century, one of the first banners they made and displayed was their tribute to the man. "We've got the battle fever on" has become a phrase used regularly whenever Rangers are playing a big game. But in remembering Jock Wallace, we remember not just a great Ranger, but a great man. He served his country, and he was devoted to wife Daphne, who he married back in 1960. He loved his family, he loved his football club, and his family and his football club loved him. In 2022, when Rangers celebrated 150 years of the club, Daphne Wallace was invited to attend the celebrations, as she made the trip to the stadium from her home in Spain. All of the Rangers support were delighted to see her involved. Jock Wallace was unique in many ways. The only Rangers manager to win the treble twice. The man who trained the only Rangers team to win a European trophy. The first man to be Rangers manager twice. The boy who used to walk 5 miles at the age of 9 to catch the supporters' bus to Ibrox became the man who gave those same supporters the greatest of memories. He would have been 90-year-old now. If he was still with us, he would still be living and breathing Rangers Football Club. The Four Lads podcast is delighted to be able to pay tribute to him.
I think I would say he was special for me, great manager, and what he did was in 1993 he did a piece in the newspaper highlighting his career, and I couldn't believe it when he was asked who the best signing he ever made as a manager in his whole career. He said me, and I was totally touched by that. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked by it because I thought, well, I did pretty well for him, but I wouldn't have thought for a minute he would have said I was his best ever signing, but he did. And to me, it was great for me because he was my best ever manager.
Well, he loved Rangers as a wee boy. He started supporting Rangers when he was a wee boy in Waterford. He used to go to the games when he could, even when he was a young boy, 8 or 9 years old, and he loved Glasgow Rangers. It was his team, he adored them, and it was his dream to manage them. You know, I've got a couple of cards that he wrote when he was out in Singapore and Malaysia fighting out there, and it was, I don't have it with me today, but I'm going to be a Glasgow Rangers manager. So as a fan, he dreamt that he was going to manage Glasgow Rangers, and he did it. So what did Rangers? Well, he loved Glasgow Rangers. He loved putting Rangers into Rangers. You know, he just loved Glasgow Rangers. It was only, he went and was successful at other clubs, but Rangers was his only true love.